All right, welcome to the Lair of Secrets podcast about gaming and being a geek by two middle-aged geek dads. I'm Ken Newquist, and I escaped from Philadelphia, which can be way harder than escaping from New York.
And I am David Moore, and I want to thank John for pointing out our audio issues in the past. It does seem like we fixed them, but let us know if they've happened in the future. Today, actually, we have a guest. This is our second guest on the podcast here. We've known him since before we moved into the lair, when he was Overlord Chris Miller at the secret lair, of which we are in the remnants of and the tunnels of. And so he's been a longtime friend, a gamer, and has the enviable position of having been able to retire early. And so we were hoping to talk with him today about his experiences. We've talked a little bit about our experiences with gaming during COVID times, but we wanted to have talk with him about his gaming experiences with and how they've changed during COVID times, and also how his board gaming experiences have changed during COVID times as well. How you doing, Chris?
Doing well. Thanks for having me, guys. I think this is the first time I've podcasted in a conversation with anybody in 12 years, so this is pretty great. Thanks for having me.
Yep.
It's just like falling off a mountain.
It's like I'm somebody again. It's like I matter. It's
great. So, we've had. I'm going to try not to talk very much because I think I've talked a fair amount about my poor luck with gaming over the last 3-ish or so years, with local groups getting together and then imploding, and then just because of real life stuff, and then COVID happening, and new gaming group, and real life stuff, and it implodes again. So I don't have a lot of experience with gaming on the regular, because a lot of those COVID games also got canceled because of real life stuff, when half the group couldn't show, sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So Chris, like how have you found gaming has evolved over the last 2-ish years since COVID hit?
Well, I didn't start reflecting on this until that space between Delta and Omicron, where it looked like things were going to loosen up and we were all going to start to be getting back together. Coming into COVID, I had a group, or I still have a group, that I game with, a bunch of guys from a job or two ago and friends from high school kind of combined into one group. And we've been gaming together 6-7 years now. And trading off who's the GM and that sort of thing. And then when COVID hit, we moved to, Roll20 or Owlbear Rodeo, those kind of things. But it wasn't really until that space in between Delta and Omicron when I said, hey, pretty soon we're going to be able to get together and get around the table. And there was this silence that really kind of knocked me off my feet. And people kind of going, yeah, but that means driving, and that means, scheduling. And it's a fair thing because people live on different sides of town here. And I'm in Cleveland. I live 40 miles south of Cleveland. There are people up in the east suburbs and the west suburbs. And as we began to talk more, people didn't want to commute to the game, just like the work situation these days, right? No one wants to commute to work. Why would you do that? Yep. You've proven you can do it online. And that was a bit of a surprise, and not an unwelcome one, but it made me think about, this same group when we tried to do virtual tabletops pre-COVID. It was like, oh, this is too hard. This is ridiculous. It's not the same. It's not the same. I don't want to do this. This is it. So, a lot of it comes out of necessity, of course, and you adapt. But, watching that happen, and then I had a second group that I was running for, which was my kids group. They're in college, and they had some friends that wanted to start playing D&D, and so I began running for them. And it started virtually. And this is a generation that does everything virtually. I mean, I've never seen such dedication, and we can get into generational differences if you want to talk about that at some time, because that's fascinating to me.
Yep.
But, they adapted really, really quickly to the online thing because that's where they live their lives. And it was utterly fascinating to see how well they adapted and how it took a little while for my other group, which is a bunch of guys about our age, guys and girls, about our age within 10 years or so. So I guess the things that I'm seeing is really that desire to stay online because it's simpler and it makes the scheduling easier. Um, and and then if you're wanting to game locally or you're wanting to game with people, I've got a separate game that I'm just setting up that's hyper local. We all live within 3 miles of one another.
Okay.
So that we can schedule and get together and the commute is not an issue.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I guess the thing, I mean, there are lots of things that we can delve into here with COVID and everything, but I think it really comes down to people really found that they were comfortable with the online thing much more so just because there was no other option.
Mm-hmm.
And now we're not sure they want to go back.
Yeah, like I've seen some of the same thing. Again, my luck with groups notwithstanding. But I was talking with my girls after talking with you about coming on and talking about this. I was actually talking with my girls and thinking it would be interesting possibly to bring them on and talk about their experiences. And your experience with your kids in the college group, very similar to what I was hearing, was like, my youngest was saying, yeah, I play online all the time. Like the only time I don't play online is at Gen Con or another con, in the pre-COVID times, or when you guys were running something, locally here, which was also usually related to like a Gen Con or a con sort of thing as well. And then every other game that they've played has been online. Right. And, one of the questions I want to ask them is like, and I want to ask you is like, how does the role playing work there? Because one of the things that Ken and I had talked about, and I'm sure other people have noticed, is like when you're in if you have a group and you're all sitting on some couches or sitting in some chairs around a table or whatever, there's like side conversations, and side role playing and things like that. And when you're playing online, you can't do that. Because okay, we don't know how have you guys done that? Because, it's like you can, when you're in a room with, 6 to 8 other people, like you can even be talking with someone and yet your ear can also pay attention to a conversation over across the room. And yet when you're all online in a situation similar to this one, you're going to talk over each other and it's impossible for anybody to hear anything. How have you guys solved that if you've been able to have those side things?
Well, there's a couple of things. So the college group, they were very hard to focus. I think everybody had some form of ADD or ADHD or something like that. So it was very bouncing all over the place. And so a lot of the joking and stuff going back and forth still happened. It's just we did it in a voice chat. When I say online, let me make it clear, we were, with a college game, it was audio only.
Okay.
And then a virtual tabletop.
Okay.
Plus a Discord chat where we could post back and forth. And that seems to be the case with a lot of things. The other game that I'm in, the adult game, we do video, but we do, virtual tabletop when we need to, usually Owlbear Rodeo. And then we have a Slack channel for chat, that sort of thing. And a lot of that table talk takes place in chat now.
Okay.
Just people cracking wise, whatever. And is it the same thing as sitting around a table? No, it's not. But it accomplishes about the same thing. But going back to how the college game was different from other games, this group was so much more into the role play than the adult game. I mean,
Interesting.
like real role play.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, it's hard to. Their dedication to the characters. When the game ended, they had a separate little chat called Character Corner where they would go and role play. Hey, we're around the campfire and these are the conversations we're having. They would continue playing and they would let me know of anything that came out of that was character development worthy.
I remember
And
doing something similar when I was in college,
right,
or college age, when I had, time.
Yep. And it reminded me of mushing in a big way. Take you back, but their dedication to the role play was just amazing, and it was really inspiring. At first, it was actually kind of frustrating to me because I wasn't used to it. It's like I can't keep up with you guys are playing like 24/7. I can't keep up with that. But once I learned that was kind of how they work things out, I became envious that I didn't do that when I had an opportunity. Well, I mean, we didn't have chat when I was in college and playing and all that.
Right.
But watching them develop their characters, asking really insightful questions, and there are other different, and we can get into this. Different generations play differently, and that is an educational thing.
And even in the same generation, there's different types of people. There are people that really love the tabletop miniatures, moving stuff around and optimizing their build side of things. And then there's people who could spend an entire session just talking while they're shopping, and they would have the best time of their lives. So I'm more on that side as a player. It's a little harder for me as a GM in terms of like scum and villainy, the way things are, but I'm still getting used to that. So, but yeah, sorry, keep going.
No, it's okay. So from a role play standpoint, that was the thing, is that the college group was much more into that heavy role play. The adult group began to move in that direction. We actually switched games during COVID. We had one that ran, it ended, and then I started running Frost Maiden.
The D&D module.
The D&D module.
Rime of the Frost Maiden or something like that.
Absolutely.
Yep. Okay.
Rime of the Frost Maiden, and I began running that. And there are certain things in that game, and I added some things into it to encourage that level of role play.
Cool.
And they were really getting into it. Now, they were a bunch of adults with jobs, and so they were not doing Character Corner 24/7 off in the corner. But we began to get that level of characterization that I like in a game.
Cool.
That was worthwhile.
Maybe we need to make a Character Corner for our scum and villainy game. So
it's not a bad idea. I mean, I think, our game, you're fighting an uphill battle a little bit with some of us in that game, just because we're not used to the style of game.
Right.
Right. And figuring out how much agency we have.
Yes.
We have much more agency than any other game I've ever played, and I'm kind of a deer in the headlights.
Yeah, it's taking stuff to get you. It's taking a lot of stuff to get a lot of effort for me to get used to it as well. Not from the agency standpoint, but from like, how do I prep for this? Because you, like, as we were talking about, like shortly before I think we started recording, was like, if Aaron had been in the last session that we had, we would have had a spaceship disguised as a giant parade float in space. How do I plan for that? You don't. You don't.
You improv.
Yeah. So I've got a
yes and.
Yeah. And I came into this game thinking I was ready to do yes and, but had that actually happened in the game, I would have said yes, and then it would have steamrolled right over me, and I'd have been flat as a pancake and not known what the heck to do. But yeah, I will say, like, our current Scum and Villainy game has done something that my local games have not done in years, which is like had actual character backstory write-ups. Like like the last D&D game I was in, I wrote up a character backstory, and other people talked about their character backstory, but didn't actually like write them up and share them with the group. And so it was like, how do you like, we didn't get into the role play as much as, and I know that there are a couple people in that group that love role play, but as a group, we didn't gel as role players. So I like the game we're playing right now from that standpoint.
You know, one of the real benefits of being retired is I can spend almost as much time as I want on this. And
making us jealous again.
Last October, that hyper local game I was talking about, I contacted 4 people and said, you know, I want to have a game that we play in person on the regular.
Yep.
You know, and I'm not going to start running it until March. Let's spend the next several months, because trying to schedule something through the holidays was, you know, everyone knows that's the holidays kills games.
Yep.
But let's start talking about characters. I'm going to plan the game, and I'm going to do all the game planning. I'm going to take months to do that. Let's start planning your characters. And we've had several, like, Game 0, Game 2.5, or Game 0.25, Game 0.5,
yep.
where all we've done is work on character background. And we're switching to a system that no one's played before. We're going to use Savage Worlds. It's basically Savage Dresden.
Yep.
So, you know.
Ken is a big fan of Savage Worlds. So
right.
I indeed am.
Yes. And I love the system, but I don't play it very often. So I decided, you know, if I'm going to start something from scratch, let's do that. So, you know, there's a learning curve, but everybody's written up a character background. We've spent hours talking about all of this, so everyone knows who they are before they sit down. Because, you know, you can play D&D very hack and slash and, you know, kick the door and loot the room and all of that.
Right.
But if I'm going to run a world like a Dresden Files game, there's got to be some really heavy characterization, because that's all story.
Yeah.
You know?
Yep.
And so having them really get invested in those characters is going to make the game that much more fun. And I'm thinking about doing that more often now. You know, making that part of maybe not months of it, but, you know, sit down and say, okay, I'm going to planning a game. If you want to play, let's start planning those characters, and let's get you invested in them. So that when things get tense, it means something to you. It's not just, oh, I'll roll a d20 and hope for the best.
Yeah, and that, like, when I threw out the call for people who are interested in playing Scum and Villainy, you know, that's part of what I was saying is like what it's trying to pull in was people who are interested. Like, I very specifically said your character needs to be proactive, you know, and to be someone that looks for adventure. And doesn't, and is, you know, there is a time and a place and a game and many games for people to sit back and go and follow the story and listen to the story, and fight their way through, you know, dungeon bosses. But this was not going to be that game. And so I got a good set of people, for our game that is interested in doing that. And it sounds like kind of like when you were saying, hey, we're going to start in March, let's start talking about our characters now. Not only did you prep them to do that, but it also sounds like, you know, like if there were people that said, no, I don't have time for that or whatever, like that might have been their out for saying, this isn't my kind of game, but maybe next time.
And, you know, I'll be honest, you know, I picked 4 people that I knew would dig this, right? I mean, that's so, you know, but, you know, you bring an interesting thing up about just GMing. How do you GM? And as I was running Rime of the Frost Maiden, you know, I had thrown it out there. Let's get together. And everybody kind of went, I don't know. I realized I had been running that through Roll20, and, you know, I had no idea how I would run it in person, because all the resources were on the computer.
Yep.
And all of that. And, you know, one of the great things about those virtual tabletops is that they are so much more robust than me rolling out a dry erase map board and drawing on it in, you know, and we're using coins or figs or whatever to map everything out. Having all of that on a computer screen is pretty great.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%.
So, but just realizing how it changed my GM style, because I became very reliant on the fact that you only see as much of me as is in this video screen. I can be keeping notes, or I can be switching windows, or I can be looking at all that kind of stuff. Whereas in person, that would be insane.
Right.
So,
right. Yeah, I mean, I've even thought like running in person, even before times, before COVID, I'd been thinking about making like a gamer coffee table that would sit, because we have a nice setup for gaming in our living room. Like when we got rid of our old couches, we bought a new couch sort of setup that would benefit people coming over. And we used it for a little while, and then COVID, but I was going to build a coffee table that you could remove the top on. But my plan had been from the get-go to put a television in there so that I could do something like Roll20, and Albert Rodeo wasn't out there, but my choice now would probably be Albert Rodeo because it's so simple to set up. But to do that and have any combats that, like if we were playing D&D, would be there. Even when we were in person, since it's in the living room, I have a Chromecast on the TV. And so if I had artwork or a person's image or whatever, or even maps, I could, connect my little Chromebook that I was using to the Chromecast and, set it in multi-monitor mode. And hey, there's what you see when you enter this, high-tech corporate headquarters, as your superheroes. Here's what you see. And it worked because they'd be like, I want to go there. And they'd point at the screen and talk about it. So like, I totally get the whole running with a virtual tabletop and not having all the extra stuff to deal with.
I had done something similar right before COVID. We'd repainted our dining room because we realized we don't need a dining room. We don't entertain. So we turned it into a game room and we painted everything white. And I got myself a little Pico projector.
Nice.
And, I was just going to project the VTT up on the wall.
Yep.
When it came down to combat stuff, and then that would have worked.
Yep.
There's lots of solutions for that in-person thing right now. But it's been fascinating to watch people become comfortable with it to the point that they're not sure what to do without it now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like running Rime of the Frost Maiden, I'm assuming you bought the module on Roll20.
Oh, yeah.
And
I'm not going to prep all that. No, I
like,
bought it on Roll20.
Like, here's all the monsters, and you can easily keep track of their hit points per mini. You don't have to go, oh, that's number one. Oh, wait, no, that one's number one. And write their hit points down separately or whatever. There is a lot of benefit to letting the computer do that for you. But I've also, there's being a developer myself, and I know you guys are kind of in the same boat. Sometimes pen and paper is better than any app, so finding something like Roll20 that actually makes things better than just standard pen and paper, instead of just being a replacement for pen and paper or worse than pen and paper. There's plenty of stuff out there like that now. It's a rare find. That's why I like Albert Rodeos, because I don't have the learning curve that I do with Roll20, but I know that buying the module on Roll20 does make things a lot easier as well.
Yeah, and that's probably a whole other show, is comparing VTTs. That's
yeah.
But Ken, you look like you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think your comments on like re-entering after COVID, I think are interesting, right? So prior to COVID, my gaming group's been around forever. And so we had a fairly large group, and we split it, right? Like, so half of it would be online and half of it was in the real world, and we alternated every other Sunday. And then COVID hit, and the guys who like to play in the real world, well, I mean, they like to play in the real world, so most of them didn't go online, a few did. The rest of us stayed online. And then for the last 2 years, then people have started moving around. So as I mentioned previously. One of them like moved to Ecuador.
Oh, jeez.
One is
Yeah.
currently in Albany, right? One has like a 5-year-old, right? And so he's it's a lot easier for him to jump on without having to leave his house, right? Instead of we've all had to balance kids at one point or another in gaming, and it's a hell of a lot easier to do that if you can just jump online. And so I think the same as you, Chris. Like that sweet spot between Delta and Omicron, where you're like, all right, like you start getting the band back together again, right? Like you start talking to people, like, hey, who's interested, and like I know some people are gonna want to stay online, so you start like going out to all your gaming contacts and saying, hey guys, I'd really like to sling some dice in the real world. What would you like to do? And we all started talking about it, maybe, and then boom, Omicron hits, December shuts everything down, right? And so now, like, I haven't brought it back to the group yet, but like I'm kind of on the cusp of that and trying to figure out like what's it going to look like, and what's it going to look like. Like right now, I can probably guarantee there's at least 3 of us, maybe 4 of us, who would want a game in the real world, and it puts us in this very interesting situation. Maybe scary, interesting, kind of like getting divorced, right? Like, I haven't been divorced, but I have friends who have been divorced and have told me of the experience thereof. Like, you're dating again at 50, right? Like, my gaming group's been together for 25 years, right? Like, we haven't gone looking for group in decades. And suddenly, now you're on the other side of the pandemic, and you're like, and there's still like all this sort of like pandemic dynamics, right? And like all that stuff that gets tied into people's opinions about how things have gone over the last 2 years. And now you need to try and say, okay, well, hey, new person, do you want to join our group?
Yeah. And that's, I get you. The Savage, I'm sorry.
It's an interesting time.
Yep. The Savage Dresden game, there are one of the people, my friend James, he and I have been gaming since we were 16. It was his basement that was, the place where we gamed. But the other 3 people that are in it are people we've known, but we've never really gamed with, not seriously. So that's very exciting. A new system is exciting, and everybody that we picked is in a place where even if we get another round of COVID coming through, it doesn't affect them as much. And what I mean by that is my other adult group, one of the couples has small kids. And, as long as there were no vaccines, there was no seeing them. And I mean, rightfully so, no judgment. But it was a blocker. Everybody that's in this group either doesn't have kids or their kids are fully grown.
Yep.
And we're in a place where we mitigate some of those issues.
You've got a fairly safe bubble.
Yeah, exactly. And so, hopefully that works out to our benefit. I don't know. We'll see. But to your point, Ken, it is exciting for me to get to run for new people. I can say for sure that running during COVID has made me a better game master. I didn't retire until last October, so 2.5 years of COVID, I was still working. Before that, I didn't prep all that well for my games. I mean, I'm an improvisational GM for the most part. I try to get the basics down, and I make it up as I go. And sometimes you can feel it. Sometimes it's, or at least I felt like you could feel it. It didn't hang together the way that I liked. But during COVID, I found that even working, we were all developers or development managers, depending on which way you go. Even working 10 hours a day, not having to commute, I was able to begin thinking more about the game I wanted, making notes, having everything. Something about having to run online made me want to get better at it.
Cool.
And made me, your point, David, about, how do I plan for X, or how do you, I learned how to I used to plan games fairly linearly, or maybe waterfall like, so it could cascade. I now do it in webs, and everything's that's the way I visualize it. It's a web, and if they land on something that I had no anticipation for, then yeah, I vamp and I improv. But for the most part, I just make sure I know where everything is, and I know enough to get me, to get them there. Because I think you talked about this on one or two podcasts ago. The party will always be interested in the NPC you have no plan for.
Right.
Exactly so.
And so, but being online, you can quickly pull up the website, grab some random stuff and run with it, or just vamp a little bit. But I think the thing that COVID made me do was really take the time to lay everything out. Sometimes I think of it as a web, sometimes a table, sometimes a map, but I just need to know where everything is. I can move it around if I need to, but I know generally the things I'll run into, and if not, then I do the best I can and I fix it in post. But something about, and it may just be that I've worked on a computer for the last 30 years, but something about this forum made me better at what I do. And I'm really grateful for that. I'm hoping it carries over to the live game, because I'm prepping for the live game the way that I prep for online games now.
Cool.
And it's definitely more satisfying, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I like, in terms of my prep for, like, one, Scum and Villainy is very different from the games that I usually run, especially and the games that you guys have played before. Savage Worlds is probably as close to Scum and Villainy as in terms of agency for the players, but it could totally be, just a lighthearted romp story as well. You don't have, it's not the same, with things we really haven't even used things like flashbacks as much in Scum and Villainy, because we're used to playing linearly.
Yeah.
In normal time.
Each game we get a little better at it.
Yeah.
And I know it's been a little frustrating for you, because we keep looking at you for, tell me what the world is, David. Tell me what the world is.
But, yeah, and I end up going, why don't you tell me what the world is?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, one of the things that I've been able to do prepping wise is, I use a markdown. I use Obsidian, which is just a markdown note-taking thing. And I will, because now that we're choosing the jobs ahead of time, I'll be like, okay, these are the possible things that they could run into. And I think a little bit about them, and I write a sentence or two about them.
Yeah.
And, I come up with about 5 or 8 of them. And then while you guys are playing, depending upon the decisions that you make, I will pull in one of those items that is the most fun, is the most interesting, and makes narrative sense,
That makes perfect sense. Like the way I'm doing this Dresden game, it's based in Cleveland. It's my hometown. I know the history real well.
Mm-hmm.
But, if you've read the Dresden Files novels, you know that there's a mob element. In Chicago, it's Johnny Marcone. Well, Cleveland has a rich history of mafia. Yep. If you haven't seen Kill the Irishman, well worth it, about one of our local mobsters, Danny Green. But, I go out and I research all this stuff. And I do the same thing if it's the Forgotten Realms. I research all the stuff surrounding where they're going to be and what they're doing. And just, I sometimes I make a list. Sometimes it's just in my head.
Mm-hmm.
But I just wait for them to get snagged on a hook. And I see, where that pulls them. So I don't know that the Savage Dresden team, if they're going to run into any of the mob stuff that I've researched. But when they hit it,
I'll
be
ready
ready for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, we've kind of hit that before. And you've talked about this earlier today, was like the one thing that you've prepped the most of, that I am now prepping the most of, for especially for games like Scum and Villainy, but needed to when I was running Brindlewood Bay, was prepping the NPCs. Like knowing who they are, knowing what their goals are, knowing kind of how their personality is. The last game I actually did a voice for the main character, which seemed to go over pretty well. The main NPC that they ran into, it was one of Ken's backstory NPCs, and that seemed to go over really well. And I need to lean into that more. And that's something that when we go back to, if I go back to in-person games, will definitely benefit from this online play.
I think, Chris talking about prepping and more time prepping. I think I always suffered from over prepping, which I've rambled on about previously, and tried to rein that in a lot. And I think Fate may have broke me of that, because I think that was, in terms of like growth during the pandemic and like actually learning stuff about gaming, like Fate does not want, like, it's simple. Right. And my brain kept trying to make everything more complicated, and because it was a mystery and it was kind of like an open-ended adventure. But just the NPCs themselves, right? Like a Fate NPC is just a PC with maybe fewer or more attributes and aspects and what have you, right? Like it's just this little constellation of data facts. I think, being raised on Dungeons and Dragons, I'm used to a stat block that's,
right. Oh,
3 pages long, right? I got to detail the whole thing. And in Fate, I won't say I bought all the books, although I think now I've bought all the books because of various humble bundles and what have you, right? Looking for like the Fate NPC book. And finally I got one. I think it's like the Fate Adversaries Handbook or something like that. Yeah. And they, it was great because it kind of showed, here's what a boss looks like. Here's what a couple of helpers look like. Here's what a minion looks like. And they're really simple. So when I was working on our campaign for Fate, I'm like, okay, well, yeah, this can be a lot easier. And I think it's helped me with D&D because now, that's what I used to do in second edition, right? My stat blocks for an NPC in second edition D&D were like, there's a line this long. It wasn't a novel.
Right. Well, D&D, it's almost like it was written by a couple of actuaries or something.
It was written by a bunch of wargamers who wanted to do more role playing and have single miniatures instead of whole armies.
If you came up through D&D and you imprinted on it, I mean, you look at the modules. Even in the old days, there was and so we decided we'll imitate that. We'll write those things for ourselves, right? Yep. I used to do the same thing again. And now I do a combination of, I do a lot of research, so it's in my head. And like you, David, I use Obsidian, so I keep notes in there. One of the other things I became really comfortable with, especially in the college game, but I also used it in the adult game to some degree, though not as much, stealing liberally from everything I've ever read or seen. I mean,
yes.
The great thing with younger gamers, like a generation after, so like if you were running for your kids, they're not familiar with a lot of the tropes, a lot of the books, a lot of the things, and you can pull those things in, and the full character. So, like 2 examples is in the college game. I needed an innkeeper, something that I could remember. And so they met Londo.
Babylon
5. My good and dear
from Babylon
friends,
5.
My good and dear friends, welcome to my tavern.
Nice.
Yep. And so, but you can't, this.
Yeah.
And you've got that down. And if you did that for like this group for Scum and Villainy, they'd know you're stealing it, but it might be okay.
Right.
But these other folks don't know it as well, and it just enriches it.
Well,
I mean, steal from the best.
And honestly, it's the same in both cases, but it's the feeling of oh, they know I'm stealing it from over here, so it's not as good. Whereas over here, they're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. You're an amazing GM. You know, there's a different feel to it, even though really it's the same thing. You know, recognizing the source material doesn't ruin it. You know,
right? Or you know, another one that I did. Did either of you read Saberhagen's Book of Swords?
Yes,
the Books of Swords.
I have. They're up there on another.
I've read one or two of them, I think.
Yeah, so like you know, magic swords, great story, but the swords are like characters in and of themselves.
Yep, well, like Coin Spinner and Town Slayer, and
Coin Spinner, Town Slayer, Far Slayer. Yeah, exactly. I began to work those into the college game because it worked.
Yeah.
And most importantly, I know them. I know what they do. You know, when we talked about Scum and Villainy, after Scum and Villainy is over, you know, I want to pitch you guys on, you know, an Amber game because
that'd be awesome.
I know Amber. Amber backwards and forwards. Probably either do Fate or Savage Worlds for it. You know, and it could be a really good time. But you know, we all, especially we 50-year-olds, we all have this rich background of tropes and stories, and you know all that. Use all of that, and I don't. And
I mean, it's effectively prep.
Yeah,
you know, especially like with your college game, you've prepped it. I mean, you know, great authors borrow, or good authors borrow, great authors steal. You know, it's 100% that. I have no qualms about stealing from things. I've done it for years and years, and occasionally I've been caught on it. You know, but at the same time, people just still had fun with it. So it's not like you're going to jail or people are going to quit your game because you're pulling Elric Meldabone out and he's one of the characters they meet.
Yep. Yeah, no, so anyway, I think I got a lot more comfortable with that sort of thing during the pandemic.
Cool.
And began to feel like it's the old thing, you know, sometimes some people say there's only 7 stories. I always like the saying there's only one story. Somebody comes to town or somebody leaves town. And you can't struggle to be original. The best thing you can do is remix all the tropes that we've had before. And so that's okay. And once you get okay with that, I find that a lot of the other stuff just falls into place.
I mean, if you remix enough, I mean, West Side Story is Romeo and Juliet, but West Side Story is its own thing. Yes, the plot flows similarly, but who cares? You know? You know, when my girls were at Macy's in New York this last year, last Thanksgiving, we went and saw Wicked, which is the first time we saw it. Yes, it is the story of Wizard of Oz, but it is told from a completely different perspective, which makes it a completely different story, which is and just as cool as any other story. So yeah, remixing, grabbing, and like reading modules and taking whole or part of the module and putting it in your campaign setting, and changing it enough so that it fits. You know, that's tried and true, at least on my side of the gaming spectrum. But I mean, it's really cool to hear that now that you've been gaming online via COVID and with another generation of gamers, you're more comfortable with doing that, because I think we all should be.
Yeah, I agree. You know, we get uptight about these things, whether it's, you know, prepping or it's not like you're writing a novel and people are expecting it to be original. I mean, you're sitting down for D&D. Yeah, you don't want to waste anybody's time. You want them to have a good time. But so why not use things from the past? I mean, I'm dying. All right, I'm dying. I've got an NPC in my head who's based on Archie Bunker that I just can't wait.
Oh man,
to get into a game. And
Archie Bunker would be like, he was bad. like he was a bad
but
example of a
Archie
human being
Bunker,
back when he was on, but now
elves are all fairies. I don't know. I just don't. But I mean, he's such a character, and as long as I don't want him to be objectionable. Obviously, I don't.
I mean, you
But
could. I mean, there
yeah,
are objectionable people in the world.
well,
So,
D&D
but
is
you
all
want him
about
to
the
be
racism.
comedically objectionable, I'm guessing, is
Yeah.
what you're not
Yes,
like.
comedically objectionable,
Yeah.
right? I mean, they're making great strides with D&D these days and introducing diversity and all that. And I think that's really great, especially when you look and you realize that it's all racism within the game itself.
Yeah.
Elves versus dwarves versus orcs.
Yeah.
It's
And the
racism.
fact that like back when we really started, it was fine to kill all orcs.
Right.
Just complete wholesale slaughter or as many orcs or evil races as possible. Drow elves were an evil race and all happened to be black.
Right. Ooh. All right,
And I don't even know that any of that was intentional, or it probably was not, but it was so ingrained in the psyche of people, and they were probably just like, we need to make elves. We want to make evil elves, but we want them to be visually different. How do we do that? It may have just been like that, and then but the problem is there was no extra thought about, well, what about the social connotations of that?
Well, and bluntly, this is probably a topic for another show with people on that are not three middle-aged white guys.
Also agreed.
But
yeah,
But so,
I don't know if you intended this as a segue or anything, but we had put together a list of questions and stuff that we shared with you earlier, but we were talking about getting into the changes in like the diversity of gaming compared like then to now. I have not read Tasha's Cauldron of Everything, but I know that's on our list of adding diversity with that book in particular, and the Fate accessibility toolkit that's out there, for people that are not able, in a variety of ways.
So jumping on that, the college game that I ran, everybody in it was non-binary or trans, except me.
Okay.
And what was fascinating about that is Tasha's had come out, and people were, really customizing their characters, going to a level that I had never seen before, which is fine. But it was interesting to watch these trans guys or non-binary folks play straight up gendered people in the game.
Okay.
Now, 50-year-old guy trying to keep all the pronouns straight. The player's pronouns are different than the character's pronouns and all that. Eventually, I got it right. But watching the thoughtfulness that they put into these characters and having a backstory that was trauma-informed. And a couple of them were actually using the game to kind of work out old personal trauma. They were bringing these characters and taking something that was a part of them and putting them into it. And they didn't so much say it, but as a grown-up with a little bit of wisdom, I could see
you have experience of stuff. Yeah.
And so we were able to tailor the game to address some of these things. Now, I'm no therapist, nothing like that. But if you can put them in a situation where they feel empowered and they're doing it through their character, watching the way, like, we had one guy who was really, really anxious. Like any time I would ratchet up the tension, one time he shut down. We had to stop the game because he began to have an anxiety attack. Now, obviously, that is not my intention with the game. But watching him work through that and watching like all of these folks had anxiety to some degree or something like that, which is radically different from my adult game. The adult game, people will rush in and do things. The college game, it took them a while to feel like they were empowered and had the agency to do original things within the context of the game. And I'm sure there's some commentary on the way different generations are raised, and maybe the messaging that the 20-somethings got that maybe the 50-somethings didn't, and all of that. But watching them blossom within this game and feel more comfortable talking as their characters than also out of character was really, really rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, the first 6 months, I was a little lost, and I was also a little irritated because I couldn't figure out how to get them to commit to action. I mean, roleplay is great, but eventually you want to do something in D&D other than sit around the campfire and talk.
Mm-hmm.
But they were so sensitive to risk that we had to get them to the point where they believed in the character enough to take the risk and trust me enough that I'm not just going to kill them off.
Right.
You know? And so but the two generations play completely differently.
Yeah, and
learning that was utterly fascinating. There's a middle generation in there. Some of the millennials, my wife, her sister, I was running a quick game for them. And they grew up on point and click, like Myst style games, right?
Mm-hmm.
So their MO was to go in, pick everything up, search everything, inspect everything, see what everything did.
Mystery games would be a huge hit with them.
Right, exactly. But that's not D&D as I know it. And so
Right.
It took a little while to get so just I guess what I'm saying is that through COVID and through running these games, learning how different generations game has made me a better GM, I feel.
Mm-hmm.
But also has this ability, which I think a lot of us know, to connect people and make them stronger. And that was super rewarding to see.
Very cool. Yeah. Like it's interesting because it touches on stuff that Ken and I have talked about before with things like Gamma World. I'm a huge fan of old school Gamma World, and they have Mutant Crawl Classics is out now, as well as Dungeon Crawl Classics, and like rereading. And I actually ran like a second or third edition Gamma World game a year or two ago, and it was really weird because the game that I remember in my head was not the game that was on paper. The game that was on paper assumed people would die, and I was always a much more, and I don't know why, I was always much more role-playing type of player and attached to the character that I was playing and didn't want to see that character die. And I read up backstories, etc. And it was more of, let me explore these old ancient places and loot them and get their stuff. Which that was definitely also a part of Gamma World as written. But going in and kicking that door and killing the monster and taking their stuff was how D&D, being the predominant one back when we started, that was how that game was run. That was how that game was always presented. And I think even now that's changed with like, if you look at 5th edition characters, even at first level, they are superheroes. It is so hard to kill a character at first level. Can it be done? Sure. But it is like,
I'll talk to my Saltmarsh characters.
Yeah. Like,
hold my beer.
Like I ran a second edition game. One of my probably the shortest game I've ever run was, I ran it in the dorm room at Purdue, and everybody made first level characters, and I put them against 5 kobolds, but I ran the kobolds smart, and like the kobolds had a net, and the mage cast their one sleep spell and put some of the kobolds asleep, but not all of them. The mage was done, for the combat, because first level they only have one spell, but now in 5th edition you're a lot more capable.
Well, I think you bring up a good point that characters are a lot more heroic.
Yeah.
Which is good. I like that. If I could throw out a recommendation, one of the books I picked up during COVID was The Monsters Know What They're Doing.
Okay.
Nice.
It's a guy, he keeps a blog, and he writes up different monsters and how, based on their stats, they are best run, like optimized.
Gotcha.
And it turns out goblins are pretty badass when they've got the hide as a bonus action, and he
as long as they have the intelligence to use their tactics, exactly. They can be really deadly people. Like kobolds were always deadly had you run them as intelligent creatures, like they are.
I was like giving them a necklace of fireballs. That was but I mean, that's neither here nor there. But I think that one of the things that's really come out in the intervening years between like Red Box and now, people want to be heroes.
Yeah.
They want to be the hero of the story.
Yeah.
And, with wargaming, one of the thrills is, am I going to die during this next thing? Is this thing going to kill me off?
I think the words you just used there are very important. People want to be heroes, not they want their characters to be heroes. They want to be heroes, and so they embody themselves in their characters. I've definitely been in games where it was gaming as therapy, similar to your college games in certain ways. And characters are can be much more a surrogate for you as a player. And
well, I mean, didn't everybody go through the phase where they made themselves as a character?
Oh yeah. I did a whole vampire game, which to this day I will still have people who were in that game saying like that was one of the best games I've ever played in, which is very humbling because I didn't do a whole lot, honestly. I said, hey, here's the vampire 1st edition book. Make yourselves. Don't care about the points. Just go through all the skill descriptions and make yourselves. And then we ran that. So that was a very literal make yourself as a character. And they had tons of fun.
I know there are gamers out there. They probably also play Dark Souls, which is a horrible thing, but that feel like, I want it to be realistic and I want people to be able to die. And there's something to be said for people to feel that there's an element of risk, but there's nothing wrong with giving a trigger warning if that's coming.
Mm-hmm.
But people are there to have fun. Have fun.
And there's more.
Let them pull off a stunt. Let them because in an era of Marvel movies.
Yeah.
Let them be a hero.
There are many more risks than just character death you can play.
Yeah.
And Marvel movies also prove that. They didn't stop Thanos the first time.
Right. Well, and that is an important lesson that I watched the college kids learn, and even the adults had to learn it during this session, which was bad things build character.
Yeah.
Your character remembers these things, and you'll do things differently because of it.
That was one of the things that Spirit of the Century, which was like the proto Fate game, really drove home to me, which is bad things or bad choices or other things like that can actually lead to very interesting and fun games.
which I think we're embracing in Scum and Villainy to bring it back around.
Yeah.
We none of us are shy about making, sometimes taking the devil's bargain or doing something that we know is dumb, but the character would do it.
It is one of the game. I think that, and of course Blades in the Dark, which is where the original system comes from. The Forged in the Dark style games are built to make bad decisions as part of play. There's the whole downtime of indulging your vice to bleed off stress, and in Blades in the Dark, it's even more so because your group is, in Scum and Villainy, you could be a group of freedom fighters, and you could be the goody two shoes of the galaxy. Whereas in Scum and Villainy, you are a literal street gang, and there are rules for when your character gets thrown in prison, how to take over that prison a la mob style and run the prison and run your gang from the inside. There's a lot of stuff like that. And it does lead to cool stuff. Go ahead. So
I was just going to say, I would have thought, I had this thought after we were already into Scum and Villainy that it might have been good to do an episode of Fiasco or like a two-parter of Fiasco as a palate cleanser, because Fiasco totally takes you out of the D&D mindset and it kind of like reboots your brain a little bit, right? Because as part of the storytelling, first of all, it all is going to end badly, but you're going to have fun doing it. You have a choice with every action as to whether you're setting the scene or you're or you're just making a decision, right? And so depending on what you want to do with your character, you'll choose one of those, and then the other players either choose the action or choose the scene, right? And so it's very interesting, and it just kind of it breaks your brain in interesting ways and nice ways that would help with Scum and Villainy, right? To get you out of that D&D mindset.
Yep.
I apologize. We've been rambling all over the place. I don't know if we accomplished what you wanted to talk about.
I think there's a lot of cool stuff in here. I was actually about to say, we have gone on for an hour. I think there's plenty more that we could talk about in the future. So I think if you'd be willing, I think we'd have you on again to talk about stuff like this.
I've really enjoyed this. I don't get to ever since my friendly local gaming store shut down, I don't get to talk to people about this stuff much. So count me in, guys.
I mean, it's part of the reason I reached out to Ken and we started this whole thing was to talk with people about stuff like this, because I don't have this sort of outlet locally either. So but for those of you out there watching, thanks for watching. If you're listening on a podcast, thank you for listening. If you have feedback, we love feedback. You can send it to us at podcast@lairofsecrets.com or via Twitter @lairofsecrets. We, as some of you know, because you're watching, we stream this live on Twitch. Tuesdays is when we do our, most Tuesdays, a lot of times life intervenes, but Tuesdays at 8 p.m. Eastern is when we're on Twitch. And the Scum and Villainy game that we've been talking about, we're going to run through probably end of April-ish. And that's on Thursdays at around 7 p.m. Eastern. So if you want to get your fix on those things, we're at twitch.com/Lair of Secrets, one word. And you can also visit lairofsecrets.com. Which is the actual websites, and you can leave us feedback, topic ideas, or your own thoughts on what we've talked about. So thanks, everybody, and have a great day.